save you? Will foreign troops invade your soil? Will government enslave you? Will the greatness that was once your crown be trampled in the streets? Oh, America, don't let your name go down in such defeat. America, America, the tide is rising fast. Don't you think it's time now to remember your great past? America, America, now the tide can still be turned. Just open up your eyes and see the lesson to be learned. America, America, once God's word was your standard. How gradually you've compromised, how far you find.
Time and time again about a new world order. And this is the best chance to begin to establish the new world order. And that's why the stakes are so high. It's not just Kuwait. It's not just Iraq. It is a question far more fundamental than that. It is a question if, in fact, an allied coalition, 28 nations deploying forces in the Persian Gulf, can, in fact, establish order there in a very volatile region. And if we establish order and establish peace and stability, which I think that we will, it will have a tremendous impact on future tyrants and dictators that will think about going in and gobbling up a weaker country.
Что мир развернулся в своем движении в другом направлении, к новому мировому порядку,
I
к
think
новой цивилизации.
even that does not describe why the world has changed so much and why the world has turned so much toward a new world order and a new kind of civilization.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind.
This letter, which is available at the back table, and I want everybody to have a copy before you leave today. This letter was sent out to all the heads of state in the world on December 12th, 1990, to announce the intent to form the world government. President Bush and all the world's leaders got a copy of this.
The idea for a new world order is not new. Over the centuries, it has been a subject discussed only in the secrecy of smoke-filled conference rooms, in the upper echelons of secret societies, and under the cover of top-secret government agencies. Only in the past few years have politicians started talking about the concept openly and publicly. Why now? Because these well-planned programs for world government are almost ready for implementation. As we approach the turn of the century, the time has finally come, they think, to prepare mankind for the transition. A slick, multifaceted advertising campaign has been launched to convince the human race that we should no longer think of ourselves as citizens of our respective countries, but instead as members of some sort of global village. We're children of the universe. Briefly, Let's review the history of this conspiracy for world government and see just what our favorite politicians have in store for us. Men have always fallen prey to would-be dictators who, under the guise of noble causes, have strewn the battlefields of history with the carcasses of their victims. There were the ancient Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans who followed them. In almost every generation, there has been at least one powerful monarch or politician who has sought to enslave as much of the human race as he could. Edward Gibbon, in his voluminous work on the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, charted the course of an advanced civilization, given not only to the noble aspirations of peace and prosperity, but to the wickedness and debauchery of a depraved society as well. The Caesars had conquered the world, only to die at the hands of men more sinister than they. But the quest continues. In the 5th century, a Frankish monarch by the name of Merovee established a dynasty which has, over the centuries, attempted to revive the prestige of the Roman Empire. Offspring of this family of European monarchs have scarred the face of the earth with their programs for world conquest. In the Middle Ages, they attempted to revive the throne, the crown, and the title King of Jerusalem. 5 European armies under the command of Godfrey de Bouillon drove the Muslims out of Jerusalem and attempted to establish mankind's long-awaited utopia. The year was 1099. Godfrey de Bouillon died the following year, and his brother Baldwin ascended the Crusader throne. This revival of the throne of David was supposed to last 1,000 years, but alas, the so-called Kingdom of Heaven was defeated by the Muslims in less than 200 years. These European crusaders believed a lie. They were taught that they were in the service of a man who had descended directly from Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, and therefore had a divine right to rule the world. This would-be monarch converted the Al-Aqsa Mosque that stands today on the south side of the temple compound into his palace, and the Mosque of Omar into a Christian shrine. As far as we know, however, no plans were made to rebuild the magnificent temple that had once graced the site. In 1118, a new order of knights was established. They were called the Poor Knights of the Temple. The French term is Knights Templar. These so-called Knights of the Temple spent the next 9 years excavating the temple site, not for the purpose of rebuilding the house of God, but to find the fabulous treasure which had been hidden from the Romans 1,000 years before. According to a copper scroll found in 1952 in a cave near the Dead Sea, some 138 tons of gold and silver had been buried in 64 locations. In 1127, these poor knights of the temple returned to Europe, wealthy beyond belief. In the years following, they established an international banking cartel, loaning gold to various governments and implementing a system of taxation. The citizens of each country were called upon to support their national debt. Today, the London Financial District, which houses the Bank of England and all of its partners in the international banking cartel, is located on 22 acres in downtown London, in the middle of which stands the Church of the Knights Templar. Yes, the Knights Templar owned the international banking cartel to this very day. Their plan for world conquest has been a simple one. Over the centuries, they have succeeded in setting up a central bank in every country of the world. They create money out of nothing and loan it to the various governments in the form of paper currency. This currency is not an asset, but a debt. It is called a note, similar to the note of a loan at the bank. The currencies of all nations have become debtors' notes, upon which interest is levied and paid to the Class A stockholders of the central bank. Pretty slick idea, isn't it? The Knights Templar have bought the world. In his book, Morals and Dogma, Albert Pike wrote to the Knights Templar, their watchword was to become wealthy in order to buy the world. And indeed, that is exactly what they have done. There are some historians who say that the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, and even the Civil War was fought over an attempt to control the issuance of America's currency. The Bank of England was determined to establish and control a central bank in the United States. In 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed by our well-intentioned politicians, creating this central bank for the United States under the control of the Bank of England and its European-based international banking cartel. When the Federal Reserve System was established in 1913, the United States had no national debt. Today, however, our government owes this international banking cartel over $3 trillion. By the end of this century, all of the taxes collected in America will not cover even the interest due. Each and every family in our nation now owes the Bank of England and its subsidiaries $65,000, each family. I am reminded of what Thomas Jefferson said when he first learned that Alexander Hamilton had been given a permit to establish a central bank. He said, if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and the corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. That is exactly what is happening. After the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln voiced his concern about the prospects of private control over America's currency. He said, as a result of the war, corporations have been enthroned, and an era of corruption in high places will follow. And the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working on the prejudices of the people until wealth is aggregated in the hands of a few and the republic is destroyed. In 1913, Colonel Edward Mandell House, a secret representative of the international banking cartel, persuaded President Woodrow Wilson to support and sign the Federal Reserve Act into law. Some years later, President Wilson admitted, I have unwittingly ruined my country. And who was Colonel Edward Mandell House? He was a proponent for world government. During the Civil War, his father, Thomas House, had been an agent for the Bank of England and had made a fortune by supplying the South with equipment and ammunition from France and England. Colonel House called himself the unseen guardian angel of the Federal Reserve Act. He was not only an advisor to President Woodrow Wilson, he was the administrator of the Wilson White House. Colonel House wrote a novel called Philip Drew, Administrator, wherein he laid out a plan to bring America into a new world order. On page 222, he wrote, America is the most undemocratic of democratic countries. Our Constitution and our laws served us well for the first 100 years of our existence. But under the conditions of today, they are not only obsolete, but even grotesque. His book tells of a bloody revolution in the United States wherein the socialism of Karl Marx would be established. Colonel House wished the same for Russia, and that revolution came only 5 years after the publication of his book. Over the years, there have been several attempts in our Congress to dissolve England's hold on America's currency, but all attempts have failed. Our government is filled with politicians on the payroll of the international banking cartel. By the middle of the 1980s, some 20 states had passed legislation calling for an audit of the Federal Reserve System or for a repeal of the Federal Reserve Act. But did you hear about this in the news media? No. The big networks are effectively controlled by this powerful and fabulously wealthy secret society. By the late 1980s, the battle was once again taken to the floor of the United States Congress. House Resolution 1469 called for the abolition of the Open Market Committee of the Federal Reserve System. And House Resolution 1470 called for the repeal of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Another House resolution called for an annual audit of the Federal Reserve. But again, they all failed. How can this be? Who are these people who have a stranglehold on American politics? And what is this secret society which plans to bring all nations under their control? The international banking cartel started with the Knights Templar back in the 12th century. The sordid story of these money manipulators is well documented in my book, Guardians of the Grail and the Men Who Planned to Rule the World. On page 11, I wrote, "The members of this secret sect are neither Christian nor Catholic. They are neither Jew nor Muslim. Their doctrine sidesteps the basic tenets of those beliefs and replaces them with the teachings of their greatest prophet, whom they believe to be Buddha." On May 1st, 1776, the infamous Illuminati was organized in Germany by Adam Weishaupt, a prominent member of one of the secret societies evolving from the Knights Templar. His sinister organization conspired for the overthrow of all governments and the establishment of a new world order. Adam Weishaupt wrote, "We must do our utmost to procure the advancement of Illuminati into all important civil offices. By this plan, we shall direct all mankind. The occupations must be so allotted and contrived that we may, in secret, influence all political transactions." According to some historians, this ultra-secret organization was short-lived, but not so. They have continued to flourish under the cover of several sister organizations until this very day. In the late 18th century, they carried out the French Revolution. In the 19th century, they conspired with Karl Marx to produce a plan for world conquest. In America, this secret society, funded by the international banking cartel, established a group called the Council on Foreign Relations. In his book entitled En Route to Global Occupation, author Gary Kaw quotes from the handbook of the Council on Foreign Relations concerning their origin. On May 30th, 1919, several leading members of the delegations to the Paris Peace Conference met at the Hotel Majestic in Paris to discuss setting up an international group which would advise their respective governments on international affairs. The United States branch was officially formed on July 29, 1921, and called the Council on Foreign Relations. Over the years, this group has accomplished some astounding feats. They established the United Nations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Club of Rome. Their tentacles reach into every facet of American life. They influence our educational system from the earliest grades to the university level. They provide politicians for local, state, and federal legislatures. They educate our lawyers and control our judicial system. And they effectively control both political parties in our nation. They provide candidates for our federal government in both the Democratic and Republican parties. We are told that the candidates differ in their approach to government, but in reality, it doesn't matter who is elected. Both will work for the establishment of world government. This is true not only in America, but in almost every nation in the world. They are moving quickly to establish a new world order by the year 2000. Pat Robertson, who once hoped to become the Republican nominee for president, recently published a book entitled The New World Order. On page 109, he wrote, "Anyone who takes an oath of office to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States and then deliberately attempts to subvert the sovereignty of this nation is guilty of treason." Some 2,500 years ago, the prophet Daniel wrote about a coming world government headed up by an antichrist. He used several metaphors to describe Lucifer's plan to enslave mankind. Daniel called this world government a dreadful beast with 10 horns, rising out of the sea of humanity. Then he described another little horn, which would arise and conquer 3 of the first horns. In Revelation 13, this beast is said to have 7 heads along with its 10 horns. The biblical view of the prophecy tells of 7 heads, 10 horns, and a little horn who will pluck up 3 of the first horns by the roots. Now, these numbers are fascinating in the light of modern developments toward a new world order. The Council on Foreign Relations established the United Nations in 1945 to be the catalyst upon which world government will eventually emerge. Over 160 nations now belong to the United Nations, corresponding quite nicely to a prophetic sea of humanity. The Club of Rome was organized in 1968 to oversee the unification of the entire world. On September 17, 1973, the Club of Rome released a report wherein they proposed to divide the world into 10 political and economic regions. Their original document called these 10 divisions of our world 10 kingdoms. They seem to correspond quite nicely to the 10 horns on the beast in the books of Daniel and Revelation. Also in 1973, the Trilateral Commission was established, bringing the leaders of the 3 richest nations in the world together to foster a new era of global economic interdependence. Japan and the United States, along with Great Britain, represent the most powerful industrial base in the history of mankind. Each of these 3 nations funds their gigantic corporate structure and industrial base with a colossal stock market. The London Stock Exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, and the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Since 1973, the Trilateral Commission has evolved into the G7, or Group of 7. The Far East is dominated by Japan. The Western Hemisphere is spearheaded by the United States and Canada. Europe is represented by Britain, Germany, France, and Italy. The 7 heads of these fabulously wealthy nations have met 18 times since 1973. The most recent meeting took place in Munich, Germany during the first week of July, 1992. The leaders of these 7 richest nations in the world are preparing to establish a new world order.
While we've been traveling, one of the pieces we got here, and this came from Oklahoma City. This is from the Oklahoma House of Representatives. And for those of you who are called crazy for saying there's a new world order or that we really don't understand what it means, I imagine that maybe an official document would help out to demonstrate that we're not the only crazy people out there. This is the Oklahoma House of Representatives Anti-New World Order Resolution. It was enrolled House Resolution number 1047. It was sponsored by Monks, Adair, Apple, Breckenridge, Caldwell, and virtually 30 to 40 other individuals. There were others that signed on afterwards. It was signed by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, received by the Office of the Secretary of State this 29th day of March, 1994 at 1:29 p.m. in which it states, whereas, and I'm only going to read some lines of this because I don't want to take up too much time, whereas there is no popular support for the establishment of a new world order or world sovereignty of any kind, either under the United Nations or under any world body in any form of global government, and whereas global government would mean the destruction of our Constitution and corruption of the spirit of the Declaration of Independence, our freedom, and our way of life, etc., etc. What this is a declaration stating cease and desist. And again, to make sure everybody knows, it's enrolled House Resolution number 1047 with the state of Oklahoma in the House of Representatives.
Conspiracy, one of the darkest words in the language of man. Yet there is hardly a single page of history that doesn't partially reveal the deadly eye of conspiracy at work. It was a conspiracy that directed Brutus against Caesar in the Roman Senate on the Ides of March. It was a conspiracy that plotted the betrayal of West Point by Benedict Arnold during the American Revolution. It was a conspiracy that led John Wilkes Booth to the assassination of President Lincoln on Good Friday, 1865. The past record of man is burdened with accounts of assassinations, secret combines, palace plots, and betrayals in war. The tenet of conspiracy has been a dominant force in all history. But in spite of this clear record, An amazing number of people have begun to scoff at the possibility of conspiracy at work today. They dismiss such an idea merely as a conspiratorial view of history. The purpose of this presentation is to show that the conspiratorial view of history, particularly of recent history, is the correct view. That there is a secret and powerful combine at work today. That it constitutes the unseen government of the United States.
We'll help you survive this thing called life. We're for the people. Whatever your source, upstairs or strive, for the people is there.
Well, folks, we're going on a detour from the phony glib, glitz, and glitter of regular commercial TV. Imagine a TV and radio network actually supported and guided by everyday Americans. People who, like you, are fed up, really care about their families, and want a chance at the long-lost American dream. The honest and hard-working citizens across the USA. The real heroes and heroines. Folks, this is your show. It's for the people.
We'll help you survive this thing called life. We're for the people. For the people. For the people. For the people is there.
Hang on, America. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. Chuck Harder, For the People. And with me in the studios here at the Telford Hotel in White Springs, Florida, is Jeff Baker. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing well, Chuck. How about you?
And you look hot. Lose the coat.
I'll have to lose the coat before
Yeah.
we're done. It's a hot room.
Well, it's warm, but you're home.
It's a
you're
hot
home.
topic.
That's
so.
right. Now, Larry Pratt, if you've got a coat on, you can keep it on because you're in Washington.
That's right. It's part of the uniform up here, the dress code.
Let's talk about freedom.
That's not part of what we talk about up here.
Let's talk about freedom. First of all, on an earlier broadcast, I read a list of the members of the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations that are inside the Clinton administration, and I've got the list handy here. But essentially, it's almost everybody. I mean, it's anybody who is anybody. You know, Anthony Lake, William Crow, Hallis Rivlin, Ron Brown, Les Aspin, Larry K. Smith, you know, all of the names, you know, they're all there, man. Strobe Talbot, Warren Christopher, Peter Tarnoff, obviously Bill Clinton, George Stephanopoulos, David Gergen. They are all part of the Council on Foreign Relations or the Trilateral Commission. These two groups have or have not, gentlemen, and I'm going to ask both of you, have or have not these two groups essentially set the USA policy for the last 30 days, or 30 years, I should say, 30 years? Gentlemen?
I'd say probably longer even than 30 years. Probably closer to a half century for the CFR. In fact, about 80 to 85% of all department heads within the executive branch of government have been members of the CFR for the last half century, or the Trilateral Commission. And of course, you can take the Trilateral Commission right back to Jimmy Carter and Zbigniew Brzezinski, the founding fathers, I guess you'd have to say,
of the TC.
Of the TC.
Okay, Larry Pratt, your assessment.
Well, Chuck, I think we're seeing the fruition of that kind of internationalist, one world government sort of thinking. It's certainly popped its head up rather visibly under George Bush when he talked about a new world order. And now we're seeing it even more forcefully brought to the public light with the Clinton administration and their efforts to put the troops of the United States under Blue Beret command.
Gentlemen, in a nutshell, who done it? And how long has it been going on, and how do we reverse it? Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Larry.
Larry?
Well, it's been going on at least since Roosevelt in a systematic, unremitting fashion. I think we could go back and find Lincoln and others that had done it here and there piecemeal. But since Roosevelt, it's been the continuous policy of the government to rule by decree And one of the biggest assets that the government has had is that it was able to do this without the media ever talking about it. But there's a new ball game in town, and that is that people are turning on their radios, whether it's the shortwave or whether it's the regular AM and FM, and they're getting information that they never got before.
Why did the media cover this up? I mean, this is a big story.
They're owned by the people who have to gain from this. I mean, you know, you and I think that government is anti-business. They're not. They're only anti-small business. They're only anti-mom-and-pop business. They are not anti-multinational. The multinationals have no nationality. They have no home. Their only home is money. Their place of abode is the politician's back pocket. They put money in there. They get what they need. This has been going on. Hamilton tried it. Hamilton was little more than an agent for the world bankers out of England. It moved forward to Lincoln. He probably, perhaps somewhat accidentally and perhaps somewhat in naivete, committed treason. But what's going on now, particularly starting since 1913 with the Federal Reserve, which is the uncontrolled, unlicensed, unmitigated bank in all over the country that controls our money supply. In fact, the same folks that own all of the money in all of the world. These people have been at it a long, long time. They own the media. They own the media centers. They are until the Chuck Harders and people like you came along on talk radio. People were wandering around in the dark. They knew something was wrong, but they had no concept, no clue as to what it was. Now, unfortunately for the snakes in Washington, a light is being shed. People are beginning to see who these snakes are, and they're saying, hey, wait a minute. Maybe it's time we get rid of a few of these rattlers before they get rid of us. But one of these days, the rest of America, Chuck, is going to wake up, and then I'd hate to be in their shoes.
Long story short, ladies and gentlemen, this country has a bunch of problems. One of is the loss of freedom. The control of the media is another problem.
Now, folks, the reason you're not hearing this kind of truth on the media in general is because the media is controlled. What it essentially amounts to here is that all the top media officials are members of these clubs, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, Bilderbergers, and so on, whose goal is to bring about this new world order. And the reason you're not hearing about this truth that we're showing you today is that the media is controlled. And if you think that's silly, then you just don't have your eyes open, and that's why we're here today, to help you open your eyes to see the truth. And we don't get this information from our own imagination. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the actual documents from these secretive organizations whose goal is to bring about this new world order. For example, this chart below the book was derived essentially from the membership list of this publication published by the Council on Foreign Relations, this occultic New World Order inclined organization. So we have all the information right here. Bill Clinton's in it.
Now, this organization is at 58 East 68th Street, New York City. In fact, it's on the cover of the Illuminati documents we were talking about a quarter of a century ago. Now, if we take a look at the roster, we're going to find almost every important figurehead in every party. This isn't a Republican or Democratic or independent aligned group. This group controls all parties. We have a one-party system. It's a sham.
We have another document that is available from a sub-organization of the United Nations, in which they actually display their entire plan to bring about this new world order. In fact, this booklet is entitled "A Design and Plan for a New World," meaning New World Order. In addition to that, folks, something that's really going to shock you is that they've already planned a global constitution for you. It's already been planned. They're already planning to do away with the Constitution of the United States under Presidential Executive Order number 11490, signed into law in 1969. You don't even know about it, do you?
The CFR, from behind the scenes, has dominated this nation for decades. CFR members include top executives and journalists for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chicago Daily News, Harper's, Look, Time, Life, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, CBS, NBC, MGM. The average American has never heard of the CFR. Yet it is the unseen government of the United States. It's a sobering fact that the hidden power structure of international finance has exerted tremendous influence over public opinion in this country through its virtual control of higher education and major segments of mass communications. The human mind is like a computer. No matter how efficient it may be, its reliability is only as great as the information fed into it. If it is possible to control the input of the human mind, then no matter how intelligent a person may be, it's entirely possible to program what he will think. And yes, it's even possible to program people to laugh at the mere mention of the word conspiracy.
So first, I'll just introduce who the panel is. We have a medical doctor from Lansing with the initials CP after his name. He likes to go by Constitutional Patriot. He's the author of a recent author of a book called A Renegade Government USA, Dr. Tom Robinson. Come on up, Tom. And the next
Thank you. I've just been told we're going to have the questions at 10 o'clock. That means I got 4 minutes. When Dominic introduced me, he said I like to call myself constitutional patriot. Well, I spent some 15 years earning a degree in medicine and getting a certification in surgery. And I do have an MD degree. But I have spent the last 9 years arming myself with knowledge about our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, our Coinage Act, and our pertinent history, real history. And I think I've earned the title of Constitutional Patriot, and I differ with him. I don't call myself a Constitutional Patriot. I am a Constitutional Patriot. Before we start, since I don't have but a short time, I was going to talk about some things, but I think what I better do is read a couple of things right quick, because I can read those. I think I can get those in time. I hate to do this again. We read this to the first group, and that's to make you aware why your media is the way they are. As we all know, that we don't get the truth from the media, and we're not supposed to. This is a toast that was given by John Swinton, who was editor-in-chief of the New York Times for some 20 years, and he was recognized by his peers as the dean of journalism. And as a matter of fact, for years, that's how he was designated, the dean of journalism, and he was very well respected. Well, in 1953, they had a toast for the journalists around the country. I'm sorry, they had he was giving a toast. They were having a meeting. The New York Press was having a meeting for the journalists around the country, and they were in attendance from all over. And he was asked to give a toast. He was just retiring, John Swinton. And here's what he had to say. They got the surprise of their lives on this one. Incidentally, this never appeared in print. There is no such thing at this date of the world's history in America as an independent press. You know it, and I know it. Understand now, he's talking to journalists from all over the country, and nobody disputes him. There is not one of you who dares to write your honest opinions, and if you did, you know beforehand that it would never appear in print. How's that sound? I am paid weekly for keeping my honest opinions out of the paper I am connected with. Others of you are paid similar salaries for similar things, and any of you who would be so foolish as to write honest opinions would be out on the street looking for another job. If I allowed my honest opinions to appear in my paper, one issue of my paper, before 24 hours, my occupation would be gone. The business of the journalist is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of mammon, money, and to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. Can you understand why this never appeared in print? You know it, and I know it. And what folly is this toasting an independent press? We are the tools and vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks. They pull the strings and we dance. Our talents, our possibilities, and our lives are all the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes. How do you like that?
stockholders of the Federal Reserve happen to be some of the same people involved in funding the effort to politically move us in the direction of a world government. I had my second experience in 1984 while I was on a trip to Taiwan. During a meeting with a member of the Associated Press, who was also one of the leading businessmen of Taiwan, he shared with me a list of approximately 300 people who he claimed he believed were involved in an effort to try to bring the people of this country, the United States, into a one-world government behind our backs. Now, there's a lot more to the meeting than that, and I go into detail on it in the book. But I noticed that all the people on this list were members of either the Council on Foreign Relations or of the Trilateral Commission, two sister organizations. Together, these groups have approximately 3,000 members, and they're extremely powerful. For the last several elections, almost every presidential candidate, regardless of whether or not he was running on the Democratic or Republican ticket, was a member of one or both of these organizations. And the current election is no exception. George Bush happens to be a former director of the Council on Foreign Relations. For 3 years back during the 1970s, he was a director. Bill Clinton is a current member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He joined just a couple of years ago, quite recently. Ross Perot was invited to join the Council on Foreign Relations. The motion was seconded by President George Bush. Now, you try to figure that one out. But there are some other presidential candidates running, such as Bo Gritz and Howard Phillips and Lyndon LaRouche, who are not members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Some of these people have taken a stand against the world government, but without backing from the three major networks, it's virtually impossible to get very far. Unfortunately, in this country, we have four powers now, government powers. We have the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and then we have the major networks. And these networks, I think you would agree, can sway the polls by 10 or 15 points in a matter of 1 to 2 weeks. And that's unfortunate, but they, by the way, are owned in large part by people who are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And the Rockefeller family is one of the key families that has been funding the Council on Foreign Relations and who also made the beginnings of the United Nations possible. They are also one of the stockholders in the Federal Reserve through Chase Manhattan Bank. So I noticed there was a lot of dovetailing between the economic and the political side of this one world movement. I also don't believe it's a coincidence, and this is right in line with the endeavors of the Council on Foreign Relations, that Mikhail Gorbachev, when he was in this country back in early May, while speaking to the University of Missouri, openly called for the forming of a world government. He came right out and said it. He went beyond the term the New World Order to actually call for the forming of a world government. I have the transcript of his speech to back that up. Do you know only C-SPAN carried that? None of the major networks carry that on the evening news, regardless of where you stand on the one world government issue, whether you're for it or against it. I think something that significant deserves to be on the major networks. And the fact that it wasn't, I believe, does point to a cover-up of sorts. I believe that for the most part, many of the people involved in the media who are also members of the Council on Foreign Relations come from this global mindset, and they support these concepts, and they don't want to see this effort hindered. One of those obstacles is the United States Constitution, because it protects the sovereignty of this nation. So they have to figure out a way to get around the U.S. Constitution and are working on that feverishly. They are trying to get Congress to declare a constitutional convention, at which time they hope to make major changes in our Constitution to allow us to go into a world government, or preferably to introduce an entirely new Constitution, which has already been drafted. Here it is. This is the Constitution for the world government. It is being called, tentatively at least, a Constitution for the Federation of Earth.
The best weapon that we have had is word of mouth, because the press lies. One of the aspects of it, and I want it written down if you have notepads, the Conference of the States, ladies and gentlemen, is my greatest concern at this moment. Not the pickle smoke that's being created in Oklahoma City, but an attempt to throw out the Constitution and the Bill of Rights of the United States. How many here knew anything about it? Thank you. And how did you find out about it? Thank you very much. Did the press report it? No. Thank you very much. And why not, I wonder? Well, if you'd like more information, let me give you an idea. The Conference of the States was a concealed con-con. The attempt was made before March 20th to try and sweep across the country all 50 states of the Union simultaneously. Ladies and gentlemen, many of you have grown gray fighting the con-con in the United States, starting back in the 60s or the 70s and maybe even before. And even you can admit this was the most concise, effective attack on the Constitution so far to date. No one had seen anything like it. It swept through 10 states in less than 7 days. It would have created independent corporate mechanisms at each state that would have gone to a Conference of the States in Philadelphia to demand a con-con. They would have thrown out the Constitution and Bill of Rights, brought in the new States of America Constitution. If you need some of the information on the numbers, in New York it was J79 Bruno. In Texas, HCR 18. In the Dakotas, SR 82. And also in, for instance, Pennsylvania, H.R. 30 and number 30 is a Senate bill. The Council of State Governments and ACIR, A-C-I-R, sponsored it. A-C-I-R. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could find it with the limited resources that I have, I guarantee the press could find it too, and they failed to inform you of a threat to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, that was overt.
The media, when I say television, radio, news, Time Life, Newsweek, New York Times, your AP, UPI, those are all pretty well controlled by an establishment that is lined up behind something called the New World Order, a desire to merge the United States with all the other nations of the world under some ungodly UN contraption in which Americans will lose their sovereignty, this nation will lose its sovereignty in the world. 200 years of the richest, most beautiful history will be washed down the tubes if this thing is successful and complete. And I'm not the only one that's fighting this New World Order. I mean, there are thousands of people who are doing just what I'm doing. This is a form of media that these people cannot control. They just haven't figured out a way to control it. Neither can they control shortwave radio, and they can't control the internet at this point in time. And it's got people like Bill Clinton in an absolute dither because they're losing it.
That's how simple it is. You see, regardless of all the damage that has been done by these people, by their insidious plotting, by their paranoid conspiracies, that can be corrected. The American people are still sound. I have total faith in the people of this country.
I think they really just need to know the truth, Eustace, and from that truth, I believe that if they knew the truth, that they'd make the correct decisions, don't you think?
Well, why do you think the Federal Reserve bankers control the major television networks? Because they only want their propaganda to go out to the people. They realize that 3 days on television could inform all the American people of everything that's gone on.
This is what you're getting in the media today, folks, for the new people here. And we could go on and on. I've got a whole file on these things. I think the last one on the media, and I'm spending some time on this because it's so important for you to know, you're not getting the truth. You're getting exactly what they want you to get. And, right, this is... The last one I'll share with you is from a character that we've heard about for years, and that is David Rockefeller. Okay. Well, in 1991, he was at a meeting of the Bilderbergers. And he was in Germany, and that was a secret meeting of the Bilderbergers, and we were not supposed to hear what I'm about to read you now. By the way, this can also be found in the Vampire Killer 2000, what I'm going to read you here. But he said to the media that was there at these secret meetings, this is what he said. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. What's discretion mean? Keep it from the public. He goes on to say, it would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those 40 years. He says, but the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. And he says the supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite, like President Clinton and her first husband,
The international elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the public to the national audit determination practice in past centuries. In other words, they truly believe we're going to love what they got planned for us, folks. And there's your media for you. So I didn't want to not cover that because we have so many new folks here tonight, I'm sure, that don't understand why we're talking about these things if they've not heard about it. And that's the reason. You're not supposed to hear about it.
Found. And so it was, my friends, that in a speech given September the 14th, 1994, just 5 or 6 months before the bombing, David Rockefeller, who founded the Trilateral Commission, who sat at the head of the Council on Foreign Relations, and who was the money man behind Bill Clinton's election, gave a speech. He was named the United Nations Man of the Year. He was introduced by Republican Party mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani. And he said something that was absolutely amazing. He talked about the New World Order. He talked about the global coexistence of all nations interdependently. And he said it's in big trouble. Our plans are in jeopardy. This is what he said. Let me read exactly David Rockefeller's comments to you. Now, again, this was when he was honored, given the United Nations Medal of Honor. In his acceptance speech, he said this, quote, "This present window of opportunity, during which a truly peaceful and interdependent world order might be built, will not be open for too long. Already," said David Rockefeller, "there are powerful forces at work that threaten to destroy all of our hopes and efforts to erect an enduring structure of global cooperation." My friends, he then referred to these powerful forces as, and listen to this, ruthless advocates of ethnic nationalism.
March 14th, 1994 issue, just last March, issue of Time magazine. In the same issue, How to Achieve the New World Order, by your friend and mine, Henry Kissinger. Okay? March 14th, this year, 94. Okay? Go to your local library and check it out. It's there.
This event tonight is not being sponsored by any particular group or organization per se. It really is a movement of the people, by the people, for you, the people, and is a manifestation of what can happen when people choose to draw together and take a stand for what they know is truth. I stand here tonight before you as a living testimony of what can happen in your life when you step out in faith and decide you want to make a difference. It's our sincere desire tonight that you will leave here challenged by this information. Well, without any further ado, it's my great privilege and honor to begin this program and introduce to you Mr. Gary Kaw.
From the early to mid-1980s, I served as the Europe and Middle East trade specialist for the Indiana Department of Commerce. Now, in Indiana, the lieutenant governor is the director of the Department of Commerce. It's like an extension of his office. It's a little bit different from other states, and it is a political position. Anyway, in that position, under the lieutenant governor, I traveled to over 20 countries, most all of the countries of Europe and the Far East. I was also in Israel 4 times, doing everything that I could do to promote exports from Indiana to create more jobs back at home. We were in a major recession at the time, and they were really emphasizing exports. Well, in all the countries I traveled to, most all of my meetings were set up by our American embassies. So in spending 3 or 4 days usually in each city, I made some good friends at the embassies, and we would talk about more than just business, exporting. We would talk about personal things and international affairs and politics and all kinds of things that were going on in the world. And it was in meetings such as these during my first 2 years on the job that I first began to hear the term the New World Order being used. It was always being used as a reference to a coming one world government. Some of the people talking about this were rather open to the idea. Others were opposed to it. In mid-1984, I began to speak out against some of these things. When one day I was invited into the office of one of the directors of the Indiana Department of Commerce. It was not Lieutenant Governor John Mutz, it was someone else, but a man of authority in his position. He asked me to take a seat, and then he began to question me. He said, "Gary, is it true that you've been talking out against world government?" And I said, "Yes, that's true." He said, "Is it true that you've been saying this and that you've been saying that?" And we went through a whole list of different things that he had heard that I had said, and I said, "Yes, that's correct." He said, "Gary, don't you think that this possible trend toward a world government isn't just a natural evolution of the progress of mankind? In other words, what's wrong with the world government?" So I thought, okay, that's a fair enough question. I said, "No, I don't believe that's the case because I see a great deal of manipulation behind the scenes and a lot of secrecy involving this too. This is being done behind the backs of the American people. Somebody doesn't want us to know about this." And I also talked to him a little bit about the centralization of the banking industry and some of the things I had discovered along those lines. Then I went on to share with him why I was opposed to a world government, why I believed it was dangerous. There were numerous reasons, but I just shared one or two of them with him. I said, for one thing, under our current world order, if one country steps out of line and becomes aggressive against others, the other countries of the world can put it back in its place. They can team up against that country and deal with it. And this, of course, was the case with Germany during World War II. But I said, if we go into a world government, and this world government becomes corrupt, assuming it's not already corrupt from the beginning, then who would there be to oppose this world government? There would be no other power left because now the entire world would be under a single global umbrella. And I said, isn't it foolish to throw all of our eggs into one basket like that? It just doesn't make sense to me. And I think at that point he realized I was making sense and he cut me off. He didn't want to hear anymore. And these were his exact words to me. He said, "As long as you work for this administration, you will not talk about any of these things to any groups regardless of their size, whether they are Christian or non-Christian. Is that understood?" And before I could answer back, he said, "Gary, you've been a tremendous asset to our administration and we do not want to lose you, but the choice is yours." If this information catches on here and people take this seriously and get it out, it will sweep around the world. I just want to challenge the people here tonight to do whatever you can do. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share with you this evening. May God bless each one of you.
The United States of America has been taken off course by powerful and wealthy influences who have been working throughout this century to build more government here at home and total government throughout the world. They don't intend to be limited by the U.S. Constitution, and they don't care a whit about the Declaration of Independence. These same individuals in and out of government have used great wealth to force fundamental changes in America. They have built the Soviet Union into a world power and have kept it afloat for decades, and they are still at it. Congress got wise to what they were doing in the 1950s and tried to stop them. In 1952, members of the U.S. Congress had amassed a great deal of evidence showing that various tax-exempt organizations and foundations were involved in financing and promoting subversive activity within our nation. The U.S. House of Representatives formed an official committee to investigate this subversion. Its chairman appointed a knowledgeable and determined American named Norman Dodd as the committee's director of research. Late in 1953, at a meeting in New York City, Ford Foundation President H. Rowan Gaither bluntly told Norman Dodd that he and others had for years operated under directives issued by the White House the substance of which was that we should make every effort to so alter life in the United States as to make possible a comfortable merger with the Soviet Union. Mr. Gaither added that he and others were still being guided by such directives. A startled Norman Dodd then asked Mr. Gaither if he would repeat what he had just stated before the full committee in Washington, and Gaither refused. And the plans to alter America in order to merge our nation with the USSR continued to unfold. This admission by the Ford Foundation's leader in 1953 was startling. But there were even more dramatic revelations uncovered by this committee before it was hounded out of existence in 1954. The Congressional Committee also investigated the Council on Foreign Relations, a little-known private group headquartered in New York, whose members do dominate the State Department, and also the mass media, the military, the corporate world, and, as might be expected, the tax-exempt foundations. The CFR goal: one world socialism, world government, internationalism. Scrap the Declaration of Independence in the U.S. Constitution. Replace both with a world government charter. Pull down the stars and stripes and run up the United Nations flag instead. Merge our nation with communism in a one-world tyranny. This is what they want, and that's what many large foundations and groups like the Council on Foreign Relations have been working towards for most of the 20th century. Read the history of the Council on Foreign Relations in The Shadows of Power by James Perloff. Help those of us who are trying to keep our nation independent by spreading understanding about these globalists and their goals. President Bush served as a member of the Board of Directors of the Council on Foreign Relations as recently as 1979. He has maintained ties with this world government promoting organization all during his years as Vice President and now as President.
George Bush said it like this: if you get a copy of the Operation Vampire Killer 2000 out there, this is a police manual that's been written for police officers and soldiers. It's called America Police Action Plan for Stopping the Program for World Government Rule. And on page 21, George Bush tells all of us in uniform something very surprising for all of you in uniform tonight. It says here, "It is to the sacred principles enshrined in the UN Charter to which we will henceforth pledge our allegiance." I don't know about you, but I got a surprise for George. UN building. The UN building, February 1st, 1992 is when he made that statement. This little book, by the way, has all kinds of little goodies in it about the New World Order. It was put out by 3 police organizations for hard-headed police officers and soldiers that don't want to believe what's really happening in America.
Okay, to try to put what we're going to talk about tonight in a perspective, let's talk about something called the New World Order. George Bush talked frequently about the New World Order and what a wonderful thing it would be. I think he mentioned it some 200 different times. And of course, Gorbachev talked about also building this New World Order. He talked about it hundreds of times. The New World Order, that George Bush and his establishment friends, and when I talk about the establishment, let me just preface it by saying there is a liberal Eastern establishment that runs America. It's dominated by the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and some of your wealthiest, most elite people in this country. In Europe, the groups would be the Bilderbergers, the Club of Rome, the Socialist International, and so forth. By the way, it's interesting that both George Bush and Bill Clinton were members of the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Club of Rome, and the Bilderbergers. The establishment dominates both of our mainline parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. I call them Socialist Party A and Socialist Party B. There's not any difference really between the two parties. In fact, George Wallace said back about 30 years ago, he said there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two parties. Well, I think he was very right. The liberal Eastern establishment believes in world government. They believe in a global government. And the scary thing is they think they can put this global government in place between now and the year 2000. Okay, that's only 7 years away. And that's one of the reasons I think you see them accelerating everything. They've been going along in a certain direction at a pretty steady speed for about the last 15 or 20 years, and all of a sudden when they throw everything into high gear, you got to back up and say, what's going on? Well, they believe that there's virtually no opposition to this New World Order of theirs, and they think they can slam dunk it on us. Now, the New World Order involves a world government under the United Nations. It involves one world currency, one world central bank, all leading towards basically a cashless society where everything is pushed through the computerized credit card system or banking system. The New World Order envisions a one world economic control, central economic planning like they've had in the communist countries. It envisions one world environmental control, one world population control. I guess you want to get a little idea of what that might look like. Look at China, where they have their one-child policy, and they either abort or kill, especially the girl babies, and in order to try to control population. All of this is to be held together by a United Nations Army, which they call very openly now. They're very open about these things. They used to hide them, no more. They're very confident that no one will stop them. They call it the New World Army.
What you have to learn, and these are lessons we learned in our case, why all this abuse? Why all of this power? Was it because we were committing some crime? Were we violating somebody's person or property? No, our neighbors said our kids were the best in the neighborhood. When they would lose a ball across the fence, they didn't climb over the fence. They didn't abuse the property. They asked someone to get the ball. Was it because that our teachers were not qualified? Even though the media said all the time, why don't you want qualified teachers? We said we have qualified teachers, we just don't want them certified. State certified. Why didn't we want them state certified? Because the state required every teacher that's certified to go through 32 hours of humanism. And we didn't want our teachers to be brainwashed with humanism. And I don't care how good a Christian you are, you're not going to go through 32 hours of state indoctrination on humanism and come out lily white. Our teachers all had degrees. I had an earned doctorate, master's degree. My daughter had graduate degrees. Every teacher we had degrees from Bible colleges. But that was not the issue. In fact, was it because our children were not being educated? We found out that the state of Nebraska hired a man from Texas A&M to come in and test their students every year using the California Achievement Test. We decided to do the same thing. We called the fellow up. He said, look, I'm a humanist. I'm not a Christian. And we said, well, is that going to make a difference on how you evaluate the kids? We want you to give them the same test. He said, no, I've tested Christian schools all over, but I think it's only fair to tell you I'm a humanist. I'm not a Christian. He said, my fees are $100 a day in my expenses. We paid the $100 a day in his expenses. He came in and tested our students. He went back to Texas. A few weeks later, he called and said, get everybody together. I'm going to come up and give you the results. Got everybody together. He came in and he said, the worst that you've done is that you're 7 months ahead of the state average on mathematics. The best you've done is you're 3 years ahead of the state of Nebraska on reading, spelling, and word language. We said, well, would you be willing, if we paid your fee, to go to court and testify for us? And he said, I like your results so well, I'll do it free. And when we walked into the courtroom, the judge said, this man will not testify. His test results will not be allowed in the court record because they're irrelevant to this case. Our attorney, who was CLA at that time, said to the judge, let us make sure we understand you, Your Honor. Are you telling us that this case is not about the education of these children? And he said, you got it. That night at 5 o'clock live on Channel 6, I was supposed to debate Peter Hoagland, who was an NEA elected state legislator on the State Education Committee, who is now a federal representative for the state of Nebraska. And he was fighting us so hard, and we were on live at 5, and the gal said, well, if these children are doing so well and nobody's made any complaints, why is it that you have to regulate this little school? Why do you have to do all this? Why spend millions of tax dollars to close down a little school that's doing a better job than the state? You need to learn to listen and pay attention to what these people say. They're not hiding anymore their motives. He looked into the camera and he said, the reason we have to regulate these church schools is that by the year 2000, the United States of America will be part of a global society, and these children that are not trained in state-controlled schools will not fit in. When we got off the camera, I said, Senator, by the year 2000, Jesus Christ will have a global society, and you may not fit in. What you need to understand, ladies and gentlemen, is that the educational program of America is an international program. In 1945, when we joined the United Nations, from that day to this, we have been headlong making a fast run to merge our society with the Soviet Union and with all the others. In fact, most people do not know that in 1985, Ronald Reagan's man, Mr. Schultz, signed a treaty in Geneva that the Soviet Union would in fact write the curriculum for the American public schools, and that curriculum was introduced in the public schools this fall, 1989, in the United States of America.
We got to start listening to folks, and we got to start figuring out what the hell is going on here. We got to start figuring out who the bad guys are, okay? We got to start getting educated. The Unseen Hand, an excellent book by Ralph Epperson, all right? You need to pay attention about what's going on here with your one world government. They got Kermit the Frog right here, working with the United Nations here to produce this book. And this book goes to our toddlers. This is a 3-year-old, 4-year-old toddler book, folks. How everyone should just want to belong to the United Nations for peace. Okay? They also stand for this, folks, right here. And on the back of this little card, it says the bearer of this card has essential duties for the United Nations. Request full assistance and unrestricted movement be afforded the person to whom this card is issued. The person is duly authorized by the UN General Assembly to employ any means necessary for the settlement of disputes and the maintenance of world peace. This includes, but not is limited to, the complete authority to assert absolute jurisdiction over all nations and peoples of the earth, sovereignty, the laws of nations, and unalienable rights, notwithstanding. In other words, they're saying to hell with your Constitution. We can implement global population control measures. I mean, the effect of enforcing programs to achieve a permanent state of general and complete disarmament worldwide. I mean, you folks got to start getting on the track here. Now, the media is not informing you like they should, and that's unfortunate because our forefathers said that the free press was supposed to be the guardian of our liberty. In other words, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom, okay? We need to get back to basics. You need to get educated and up to speed. We got to move on tonight, folks. We got so much to cover in such a short period of time. I'm going to let you go. We'll get back to you. God bless you. Thank you for coming down tonight.
What we have in the United States is, in fact, good guys and bad guys. And you have to bring it down to that point. Forget about talking about a congressman being a conservative or talking about liberal. Forget about Republican. Forget about Democrat. That's baloney. We go strictly on the basis of what did this character do last year. Did he vote on a GATT trade agreement that was unconstitutional in nature? If he did, as far as we're concerned, he's a bad guy. If he's interested in passing unconstitutional laws that are going to deteriorate our Constitution and put us into this one world government, and they're going in that direction, if he's passing those bills, voting on those laws, he's a bad guy. End of story. I don't want to know what he is. Whatever he wants to label himself becomes a moot point. And amazingly enough, it dawned on me at a certain point in time, back in the 80s still, that what was going on was all these random bits and pieces of unconstitutional, illegal acts connected to our congressmen and our senators, and that in fact all of it was going into a single direction. That direction is one world socialism and the New World Order, to use George Bush's quote. The New World Order and one world socialism goes back many, many years. And what's taking place now in the United States is, in fact, what I would call the end of baking a cake that's taken the corrupted persons in the world that want to put us into the New World Order, has taken them about 40 years to accomplish, where they are now about to put the icing on the cake. And basically that's what the presentation is today. Some of the information, documentation, and live footage that you will see on this tape will really surprise and shock those of you that are not up to speed as to what's going on. Amazingly, in some of our investigative research that we were doing, we came across a book that was actually, there's 3 or 4, but one of them happens to be a book that was completed 40 years ago. As you can see it here, the title of the book is The United Nations Exposed. And this was written cooperatively at that time, 40 years ago, with a couple of senators and congressmen at that point in time. And bewildering as it may be, especially for those folks out there that love to just say, well, this is conspiracy talk, this is a conspiracy freaks that are chasing these things, etc. And that certainly is not the case when, in fact, you can find a complete outline for the threat of New World Order, One World Socialism in the United States and worldwide. You can come across that outline that's actually been laid down for you 40 years ago. As you can see here also, the table of contents of this particular book is amazing unto itself. It includes the description of disarming the United States. It includes telling and describing the fact that they will put us under the United Nations. They will unite the churches into a one world, New World Order church that will pretty much, it sort of throws everything into one big bucket from a religious point of view, so that the religions become united, and then all of this, by the way, falling under the United Nations banner. Pretty scary, because what happens is the total elimination of the sovereign rights, not only of individual Americans, but the sovereign rights of the United States of America. And it would completely eradicate our normal Bill of Rights that we commonly live under, and that's maintained our freedom under the Constitution of the United States for 200 years. It's really amazing when you realize that a point in time right now has come about where our Congress is apparently going along with it for the most part. The amazing GATT trade agreement, which, believe it or not, documented the GATT trade agreement documented as probably one of the major steps 40 years ago, folks. 40 years ago, the GATT trade agreement was totally discussed at that time. So it goes back a long ways, and it was pre-planned as part of the progressive steps to eradicate the Constitution of the United States. The GATT trade agreement, which was signed recently, is 200 individual acts of treason by the Senate and the Congress. Inside the GATT trade agreement is literally 200 individual treaties. The GATT trade agreement is 27,000 pages long. No one has gone over and reviewed the entire GATT trade agreement. It's a physical impossibility of a standing congressman. Yet they did pass it.
I'll give you the best example. You didn't need to talk about, and for people to say, oh, this couldn't happen, you don't need to talk about the GATT treaty. Do you remember when the GATT was originally supposed to go before the people on C-SPAN? They were going to debate it for 20 hours. Then they cut it down to 10 hours. Then they said, oh, they only needed to debate it for 4 hours. A document that is tens of thousands of pages, a document with 200+ treaties in it, and they were going to debate it for 4 hours, ladies and gentlemen. That's only a few seconds for each person who's in the House. Only a few seconds. Now, I think if I had a chance to read the GATT, I'd have more than 16 seconds worth of debate going in my mind alone. The fact of the matter is we had it shoved down our throat. Even Mr. Dole admitted publicly that the general attitude and the call-ins were 9-1 against GATT. And he said, of course, because you don't know what's good for you, we're going to give it to you anyway.
We do not control the government of the United States of America. The United States of America is controlled by this evilarchy. They control the money system. They control the State Department. They control the presidency.
Obviously, if you've read Checkmate, The Game of Princes, you know that this has not been by accident. In fact, for over 200 years, there's been an organized plan to create a new world order. Way back in 1776, Adam Weishaupt began the Illuminati. He wrote down his 24 protocols, a step-by-step plan to create a new world order. And those who have been involved in it have been meticulous in following the steps and design of those protocols. In fact, they've been so dedicated that they have, in fact, dedicated entire generations of their family to the goal of a new world order, knowing that during their lifetime, they would never see the fruition of their dream. But you see, they never stopped. These are a dedicated people. They are the people who control the banks worldwide. As many of you know, the Federal Reserve is not a part of the federal government. It is owned by the princes of the New World Order. And we owe that Federal Reserve in this nation alone over $4 trillion. We live in a nation that is going in debt at a rate of over $1 billion a day. Over $1 billion a day. But these same princes own the central banks of England, Germany, France, Switzerland, Spain, Portugal, Italy, all the Central and South American countries, the rising African nations. You see, this is not a small game. This is not being played for small stakes. What's at stake here is the sovereignty of the United States of America. What's at stake here is your freedom, your life, your liberty, your property. You see, if they have their way, you and I will be slam dunked into a new world order.
Hello, I'm Bobby Lee, and this is The Bobby Lee Show. Today we have with us Eustace Mullins, a lecturer, an author of many books, a scholar, Washington Lee University, and today we're going to be talking about several different subjects. But this particular subject is the most important for today's political venue. And Eustace has written a book called The World Order. Now, Mr. Mullins has been working for the last 50 years to research important questions. Now, this book, The New World Order, how does the New World Order deal with the banking interest in America and across the world?
Well, you see, in studying the banking system in the United States, I found it was part of an international system of banking called central banks in Europe, and that the Federal Reserve System, which we had here, was simply an American version of the central banks they had in Europe. And I also found that these banks did not exist as some entity in some world of their own. They were an integral part of what I came to call the world order.
Jordan, you're going through reams and reams of research material, and does this come together for you?
Well, actually, I had about 135 bank boxes in storage of nothing but documents, pictures, letters, correspondence, and photocopies galore. As I said, I've been doing this for 35 years. There is so much more that needs to be said about the subject that we can never possibly get into, but there is something I really feel is necessary to bring out. We're not talking about something that's entertaining or sensational. We're talking about your government, where you live, your country, your freedoms. Right. And what we're talking about here is things which you see every day. Like someone said a long time ago, many will look with their eyes but not see, and listen with their ears but not hear. And that's us. That is this country. We have been looking at things all along and never realizing the significance of the occult emblems that we're seeing today.
On the backside of the dollar bill, you'll find the Illuminati pyramid. Annuit Septus, Novus Ordo Seclorum, the New World Order. What is all that about? I'm going to ask Jordan Maxwell.
Jordan? Yes, I will use this one I think would be better for. The novus, let's start with the annuit coeptus. Annuit coeptus is Latin, meaning our enterprise or our project is now a success or has been crowned with success. So then you say, well, your project is now crowned with success. What is the project? Novus Ordo Seclorum, which is novus, meaning new, ordo, order, the new order. Seclorium is the word secular in Latin, meaning the world, the new order of the world.
So let's look at the back of our dollar bill and analyze the symbol of the Illuminati. That's what this is, folks. It's also a Masonic symbol, but it's the symbol of the Illuminati, which controls, as Anthony said, all your money through the Federal Reserve, all the U.S. government money, and through other world banks, all the world's money. But this is their symbol, and this is basically the all-seeing eye of Lucifer, Satan, the devil. And what this inscription means here is announcing the birth of the satanic New World Order government. And Jordan, when was this placed on our dollar bill and by whom, and what was the story?
Well, it was placed in 1934, 35 I think it was originally on the dollar bill. But what I wanted to draw attention to is the fact that it's an Egyptian pyramid. And you had better look at the idea of why an Egyptian pyramid is on an American dollar bill.
Actually,
Technology.
This Illuminati, then, is the group of men who control not only all the money on the planet through all the world banks and the Federal Reserve and so on, but they control essentially all the governments. And so these men are planning to bring about a global form of government that's unique in all history. It's a total enslaving system of world communism and fascism, controlled by a hierarchy in Europe that Anthony calls what? The oligarchy.
Well, no, I call it the evil-archy.
The evil-archy.
The oligarchy of evil.
So these men are satanically inspired, and of course we get that term from the Bible, which means the devil. They're satanically inspired to bring about a global form of government to every nation on earth.
I wanted to add also that on the back of the Liberty dime, on the back of the old dime in America, there was the fasci, which you look in the encyclopedia or dictionary and look at the word fascism, you'll see that the symbol for world fascism was a bundle of sticks, a bundle of rods with a hatchet head. That was on the back of the
Well, you see that
dime.
on each side of the speaker's podium at Congress.
Oh, absolutely.
So they
and
have the fasci on each side.
Absolutely, and it's also the symbol for the United States Senate is the fasci.
But here is a picture of the new mint. It's in Fort Worth, Texas, new high-tech equipment. You can't get in there, but it's interesting that we were able to obtain pictures. Here is the mint. It's a circular building with a pyramid on top. Now, it should not surprise you that the new U.S. Mint was actually designed in an occult pattern. The devil enjoys being the power of the air and looking down on his temples of the Illuminati, his satanic architecture. But then he's also put it on your dollar bill, hasn't he? The all-seeing eye of the devil over his pyramid is on your dollar bill. The great sun god of the ancients. And underneath it, the inscription, Novus Ordo Seclorum, or New World Order.
Well, the New World Order is a group of insiders. It's sort of an international mafia, and they either work together or they get eliminated. I mean, these people have to cooperate because the death sentence is automatic if you don't. And you don't say, I'm going my way, to heck with you, because if you go your way is straight down.
Strangely enough, what this is a Kennedy note. And when we talked about the money earlier, this is the reason, despite what anybody else tries to argue, that Kennedy was assassinated. For whatever reason you may not like John F. Kennedy, for whatever reason you might have liked John F. Kennedy, this was the reason for his assassination. He had literally pulled the teeth of the New World Order crowd, in this case the Federal Reserve, by creating what were called United States notes. Now, a United States note, if you'll notice when you reach into your pocket and you pull out a Federal Reserve note, at the very top, it will say Federal Reserve, United States of America, etc., etc. This says United States note and means that there was no interest paid by the American people. Kennedy talked about this approximately 2 months prior to his assassination, and there are 3 things that he did. He got rid of the Federal Reserve, he created United States notes, and then he also struck $5 million in silver dollars, which would have been in circulation for 10+ years. He had literally saved the nation in a roundabout way and put us back on the right path towards hard currency. Unfortunately, he did not take the job as seriously as I think he should have, because once he signed something like this, he should have put himself in a bunker and just lived until the end of his presidency. That's all he would have had to have done. Unfortunately also, we know what happened to him, and 48 hours after Lyndon Baines Johnson became president, after the assassination, one of the first executive orders he signed was to rescind this money. And since then you have had Federal Reserve notes. That's why you have a national debt in the trillions.
And you know, President John F. Kennedy was alarmed over what might happen in the future. Listen to this. He said, "The high office of the president has been used to foment a plot to destroy America's freedom. And before I leave office, I must inform the citizens of their plight." He was assassinated 10 days later.
Today, it's the secrets of the Federal Reserve. Eustace, the Federal Reserve, it says federal right on this book. That must mean it's a governmental agency, doesn't it?
Well, it means it's as federal as Federal Express. That's the true meaning of federal.
You mean to tell me that the United States government does not own the Federal Reserve System? Because it's my understanding that the Federal Reserve System controls the money of the populace, the general people of the United States. And are you telling me that it's not the government of the United States, the Federal Reserve?
Well, that is the secret of the Federal Reserve, is that it's not federal. North of here, there's a millionaire's retreat called Jekyll Island, Georgia, which for many years was the private preserve of some of the wealthiest families in the United States. They met there in secret in Thanksgiving of 1910 to draft a money monopoly plan which they intended to foist on the people of the United States.
Well, how did they purchase this magical money machine? I mean, did they pay somebody off, or was it, I mean, you mentioned before Jekyll Island, and I heard that there was a no-name club at Jekyll Island. Would you tell us a little bit about that, Eustace Mullen?
Well, these are very important bankers who met there secretly in November of 1910. They left Hoboken on a sealed train, and the reporters were there, because these were very important people, and the reporters said, "Where are you going?" And they were all shouting and trying to get into the train to ask them questions. The train pulled out. They wouldn't say where they were going. They went to Brunswick, Georgia, which was the stopping place for Jekyll Island, which is just across the inlet there. And they went over to their private club, and they wrote the act in secrecy, and they stipulated it would be called a Federal Reserve System to delude the public. They stipulated that they would own the stock forever. You and I would never be allowed access to this stock. And they set up a money monopoly in violation of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which provided, the Founding Fathers made sure to guarantee the people of the United States they would have their own money. Congress would have control over the money. So then, after they wrote this secret plan, they had to take it before Congress and persuade Congress to turn over this money power to the private bankers. They did it through bribery, through intimidation, and they got it through just before, they actually put it through after the Christmas vacation started, when some of the opponents left. Congressman Charles Augustus Lindbergh, the father of the aviator, had fought this bill through Congress. He said it establishes a perpetual money trust, and our children will be enslaved by this money trust. He said it all in 1913, and it all has come true.
In the United States, it was inevitable that the international banking interests would attempt to establish the same kind of private monopoly over the money system that they had achieved in England, France, Germany, Italy, and Switzerland. The same formula would be used: make it look like a government operation, but keep the control in private hands. John D. Rockefeller had purchased the Chase Bank, and his brother William bought the National City Bank of New York. The Rockefeller Chase Bank was later merged with the Warburg's Manhattan Bank to form the Chase Manhattan, one of the most powerful financial combines in the world today. Acting in concert with the Morgan banking dynasty, they spent untold millions of dollars to promote legislation that would grant to them a private franchise over this nation's money system. To sell this scheme to the voters, the monopolists created the propaganda line that the proposed banking law somehow would work against the monopolies. Politicians took up the cry, "Banking reform," and "Down with Wall Street." And then, to make it look convincing, the financial tycoons publicly pretended to oppose the measure, all the while financing it behind the scenes. On December 22, 1913, the Federal Reserve Act finally was passed into law. Something known as the Federal Reserve System came into being, and with it, total control over the nation's money fell into private hands.
In 1913, Colonel Edward Mandell House, a secret representative of the international banking cartel, persuaded President Woodrow Wilson to support and sign the Federal Reserve Act into law. Some years later, President Wilson admitted, "I have unwittingly ruined my country." And who was Colonel Edward Mandell House? He was a proponent for world government. And Colonel House wrote a novel called Philip Drew, Administrator, wherein he laid out a plan to bring America into a new world order. His book tells of a bloody revolution in the United States wherein the socialism of Karl Marx would be established. Colonel House wished the same for Russia, and that revolution came only 5 years after the publication of his book.
The intimate papers of Colonel House, edited by Charles Seymour, reveal House as the unseen guardian angel of the Federal Reserve System. In the words of Mr. Seymour, the Schiffs, the Warburgs, the Kahns, the Rockefellers, and the Morgans had faith in House. In 1912, Colonel House authored this book entitled Philip Drew, Administrator. The hero, a thinly disguised version of himself in real life, was a behind-the-scenes manipulator of prominent political figures. In the disguised form of a novel, the book lays bare the general strategy that has been followed ever since, even to the very present. It tells of how a small group of insiders cause a depression and then bring about the election of a man named Rockland. Rockland gives fireside chats and launches a program called the New Era to strengthen government control over the masses. Eventually, the insiders who control the government weaken the country deliberately to the point of civil war, which provides them with the excuse for establishing a dictatorship.
Washington, D.C., November 1932. Franklin Roosevelt pledged a New Deal for the American people. They believed him and elected him the 32nd president. During the campaign, he seemed to contradict himself. At one point, he proposed a 25% cut in government expenditures, but later, he said he would consider deficit spending if it were necessary. He recently told an audience at Oglethorpe University, "The country needs and demands bold, persistent experimentation." Washington, D.C., 1935. President Roosevelt signed into law the Social Security Act.
This Social Security measure gives at least some protection to 30 million of our citizens who will reap direct benefits through unemployment compensation, through old age pensions, and through increased services for the protection of children and the prevention of ill health.
Washington, D.C., January 1936. A member of the president's own party, Democrat Alfred E. Smith, says that Franklin Roosevelt is a socialist and is trying to pattern the United States in the Soviet Union's image.
A few timid people who fear progress will try to give you new and strange names for what we are doing. Sometimes they will call it fascism, and sometimes communism, and sometimes regimentation, and sometimes socialism. But in so doing, they are trying to make very complex and theoretical something that is really very simple and very practical.
But what is the best way to sell big government and then world government to a people like ours, historically devoted to an independent republic of limited powers? The answer is simple. In revolutionary literature, the tactic is known as pressure from above and below. It's the strategy that Colonel House laid down in his book, Philip Drew, Administrator. Deliberately create problems, and then offer only those solutions that result in the expansion of government. Create conditions so frightful at home and abroad that the abandonment of personal liberties and national sovereignty will appear as a reasonable price for a return to domestic tranquility and world peace. If those who seek world dominion can stimulate leftist mobs into violent confrontation with local law enforcement, and also provide exhaustive news coverage so that the entire nation can see and tremble, then the peaceful and freedom-loving majority can be programmed to accept a vast expansion of government powers and even a national police force, offered supposedly to end the violence. If those who seek world dominion can raise the specter of an enemy armed to the teeth with superior atomic weapons on the verge of launching a nuclear holocaust, and also offer world government as the prevention, then millions of Americans can be programmed to accept the loss of national sovereignty as our last best hope for peace. This is the meaning of pressure from above and below. To put over police state measures at home, they need chaos, crime, and anarchy in the streets. Jerry Kirk, while a student at the University of Chicago, was active in the SDS, the Du Bois Club, the Black Panthers, and the Communist Party. In 1969, Mr. Kirk broke from the party, and the following year testified before the House and Senate Internal Security Committees. Here is what Mr. Kirk has told us. The idea is to create a situation where the people are so frightened of the violence all around them that they will throw their hands up in the air and demand, "Federal government, do something." And the only choice open will be martial law. The communists, black militants, and revolutionaries will never succeed in overthrowing the government of the United States. But unless they are stopped, they will scare the American people into accepting socialism from Washington and statist rule by the insiders of the establishment. This is what it is really all about.
You go down the line, and all of the great dictators and tyrants of the world have always dreamed of taking over the world. But everyone tried it the wrong way. Everyone has tried to take over the world with military, and everyone has discovered that military will not work. You cannot police and militarize enough to take over the world. So the Illuminati in 1776 developed a whole new concept of how to pull this project off. Instead of trying to force people into a new order or a totalitarian dictatorship on the military, which you cannot do because people are always going to rebel at that, the idea was developed by Adam Weishaupt to create enough violence and create enough chaos and enough bloodshed to frighten the world so that the entire world of mankind would one day come to the conclusion that there's too much bloodshed, too much crime, and there's just no possible way for the human race to exist unless we come together and pool our resources, and all of us accept one government and one order, and we will all live together in peaceful, happy, on one family, and nothing could be further from the truth that the chaos, that is being developed today is being developed purposely to cause us to be frightened into accepting, as a remedy, a new order of the world, which will be a total dictatorship of the earth.
Okay? Now, we are plunging towards a national police force and an international police force. The socialists believe in crisis management to solve crises, real or manufactured, in order to greatly expand their power and control over the people. These crises that the government loves to manufacture justify the passage and enforcement of new laws and regulations, expansion of bureaucratic agencies, and the installation of police state power over the people.
One of the things that I can see now that we must fear more than anything else, if we are going to have any fear, is that someone's going to try and talk us out of that flag. That through the concept of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, they will create the problem, demonstrate the problem, and come up with a solution otherwise none of you would have accepted.
Who in the world would want to create a system of crisis? Why would anyone want to have another riot?
Well, let's get down to the bottom line. On the Masonic temples around the country, we see Ordo ab Chaos, order through chaos. On the backside of the dollar bill, on the left, it says Novus Ordo Seclorum. Those individuals who want to bring about a new world order upon the ashes of American sovereignty. To do this, they have to create crisis, and they then give us order, a new world order. They set blacks against whites, Jews against Gentile, rich against poor, the women against men.
But Jack McLam is the most decorated law enforcement police officer right here in Phoenix, Arizona. I have his resume right here, and Carol and I went over with it last night on the phone, and I says, geez, this is about 2 pages of achievements, awards, education, community service, and business experience. And I'm not about to read everything on there. It would take me about half the day. Awards, he's been the Police Officer of the Year award twice, 1984. Just like to introduce right now the man by the name of Jack McLam to you.
Not often am I able to be in my own town talking to people, so I'm always very, very pleased to be with you and share some of the things that are going on around our country with people in my own hometown. So I want to thank you for coming, and I see a lot of faces I know and a lot of people that I haven't met before. So I hope before the day's over I'll have an opportunity to meet all of you that I haven't met in the past. The purpose of my work today is to basically work with police officers across the nation to understand what many of you in this room already understand, and that is the direction our nation is taking. Although officers already realize something is going on, it's pretty obvious because they work so close to it, and they're so much a part of that change that they know something is happening, but they don't understand exactly what it is. So my work for the last 4 years, now that I'm retired from the Phoenix Police Department, is to work with officers full-time and to making sure they understand what is going on. That year, I was given the Officer of the Year award for the whole city of Phoenix, and this was really something because in 20 years, a lifetime of an officer is about, on the department is about 20 years. You can take retirement after 20 years. Well, in 20 years, only 20 officers will win the Officer of the Year because it's once a year. One officer gets the Officer of the Year award. Well, we had 1,600 officers at that time, so you can imagine how pleased I was that my 3rd year on the department, 2nd year actually that was, that I won the Officer of the Year award. And so my first years with the department, my success on the street and success with some of the programs I put together for the Phoenix Police Department, several others that I won't go into, earned me the reputation as the most highly decorated officer in the history of the Phoenix Police Department. Now, I don't say that to boast. Teresa had a hard time getting me to even say that when I first started giving these talks because I don't like to boast because I think I'm just an average officer, when I was on the force. But I worked hard and I cared a lot. And so I think that, and then of course, it offends some people sometime that I say that I'm a Christian and I give all the glory to God that this happened. But if you're offended, I'm sorry, but that's actually what I believe and what helped me to become successful. But I can see the importance of what the Lord had in mind by releasing me now to work full-time at this. Because if we're going to recover the hearts and minds of these very patriotic police officers that are going to play a major role in our lives very soon, either way, if they're on our side or if they're not. Right now, majority, there's over 600,000. Our newsletter goes out to National Guardsmen and police officers because we both do the same role. In a national emergency, which we believe is coming, the National Guard will serve right with the police officers. There'll be no difference, no distinction between the two.
So we now reach thousands of National Guardsmen and police officers, and it's exciting. It's really exciting, but the problem is there's over 600,000 police officers and about 200 or 400,000 National Guardsmen. So we're reaching probably 4,500 to 5,000 police officers now and National Guardsmen combined. We're working on a geometric progression, so that's good because we can grow very rapidly. But so there's great hope, you know. And then the private citizens, of course, are having meetings like this, and we're reaching more and more people. You go out from here and you duplicate the efforts of yourself by handing out literature and educating people and talking to people, having other meetings in your area. And so we're in a situation that Bo Greitz, myself, Lindsey Williams, Don McIlvaney, and many other people that speak to groups feel is not hopeless. I mean, we see great growth in America of people that are concerned, both in government and outside of government, that are concerned about what's happening and are willing to listen and learn.
Great pleasure to announce and to introduce Jack McLam.
This is a tough subject for me to talk about tonight. Two areas I'm going to share with you right now. I have police officer friends, military friends that have perished in the last few years, taking, with the police officers, an ounce of marijuana off somebody in a street somewhere in America. I have a good friend in Phoenix, Arizona, fine police officer, only been on 3 years. Good friend of mine that one night stopped a vehicle with 4 youth in the vehicle. He discovered on one of the youths a bag of marijuana. He pulled it out of the youth's pocket. All 4 of them jumped him. One of them pulled a gun and put it to his head and shot him right in the head. He lived, but he's very, very disabled today. His wife and children are in pretty tough shape because of his injuries. He can't do as much as he used to earn a living for them. And so across America, officers are risking their lives and losing their lives and becoming disabled, and military people too, fighting what is a phony war on drugs in America. They don't know it, however. They think that somehow, just like when we went to Vietnam, that somehow we were doing something important for America to safeguard the American people. The police officers that are risking their lives today in a phony war on drugs, and I'll prove it to you in just a minute for you officers in the audience today, are doing that because they love the people, and they think somehow that they've got to risk their lives to try to stop the moral decay and the total destruction of the next generation of Americans if they can just take that little bit of dope off that individual or a little bit more off this individual, that somehow they're going to have an impact on the narcotics, bombing out a whole generation of young Americans. So they do risk their lives and they do lose their lives every day in America. But what we have here and we know today is I have a folder in my briefcase here that's about an inch thick. I have a file cabinet at home that is filled with evidence, proof positive, witness statements from the left politically, all the way to the right politically, and all the way in between, documentation to prove that the United States government have been importing drugs in from Southeast Asia and from South America since the late 60s in this nation. And they're the biggest importers of drugs in this nation. And we have the proof to prove it. I have another file in my briefcase back here. And by the way, remember, this is from the evidence from the left to the right of the political spectrum and all in between. This is documentation from both sides, all the way to Marxist organizations in the United States that have proven and shown us their documentation that this is true. We got the names of people that in the government have been bringing the drugs in. Colonel Vogreich, you know, a few years back brought a wonderful film from, I mean, it's not wonderful, but a very important film is when I first met him in Phoenix, Arizona, when he brought his film back from Southeast Asia, showing an interview he had with General Kumsaw in Shawnland in the Golden Triangle, where General Kumsaw opened his ledgers and showed the names of Richard Armitage, Theodore Shackley, and others that have been importing drugs for the United States government by the tons since the late 60s in the United States. This is hard, cold proof. But why can't we get it out to the American people? We're back to the media again. But not just the media, folks. I've got another file in my briefcase that officers have compiled for the last 10 years, myself included, as to how in America today politically appointed judges have methods for controlling the outcome of jury trials the way they want them to come out. Politically appointed judges are given specific cases against certain good Americans and against certain international bandits to be sure the truth does not come out in a court of law about who is actually behind the drug trade in America. I've got that file, and we did a newsletter on it, a police newsletter showing 8 methods in which a judge, a federal judge, and even district judges, federally appointed judges and locally appointed judges, have been chosen politically because they will cover for the right people to protect this whole corrupt system that has been set up. So you can't get it before a court of law today. You cannot get the facts that we have by the reams and reams of in file cabinets of evidence, testimony of people that have been involved in the drug trade, soldiers that have been involved in the drug trade, not knowing for years, helping the government bring this stuff in here. And the reason I'm telling you this, folks, is for this reason here. Why would our government do that? Remember, the most important statement I told you here tonight was Rowan Gaither's statement, the head of the Ford Foundation, 1954, to lower America to a level where it could be merged with the other nations of the world. Morally lowered, politically, economically, every way you can think, we had to be brought down to a level to where we could be merged with the other nations of the world. The drugs are a very, very important, I would say the most important program the globalists have going is the illicit drugs they're bringing into the United States. Why? Because it's causing a breakdown of society like we've never seen in the history of this nation. The drugs are doing that. And they like it. They are literally ruining the lives and killing off a whole generation of minority children in the part of town I live in. And I pray every night with tears in my eyes that somehow we could get this information here that we're given tonight into the minority areas, into the homes of minority families, so that they can join us in attacking a common enemy that's destroying the whole generation of their children. But we can't do it, folks. We can't do it because we're being stopped at every attempt that we try. And here's why. The most sensitive thing I'm going to tell you tonight, and the thing that'll tear at your guts, and I'm sorry for this, but you have to know this, folks. The thing that's going to tear at your heart is the pure evil that is in the highest offices in our nation today and have been for generations. Pure evil. And I'm going to read you about that evil. I'm going to read you a statement here that we found in the congressional record. It's old, but it just shows how long this diabolical plan has been going on to destroy this nation and pit one group of people against another pit of people to do that, another group of people. It has been a plan for years to keep the races separate in America, separate to where we can't join together to fight the common enemy that's destroying all of us. It's been a plan, and here we found it in the congressional record. Let me get this right. It's a book that was written by a communist, one of the top people in the Communist Party, and it's called A Racial Program for the 20th Century. This man was the man's name is Israel Cohen, and his book was written in 1912. Now, it was read into the congressional record, and if anybody's writing this down, write this down, because you're going to have to prove this to people, because they're not going to believe you. But this is why we cannot save the families of the minorities that are purposely being used to cause crime and drug problems in society so that they can cause a breakdown through fear of all Americans. And it's a plan, and here's the plan. Israel Cohen writes this in 1912, and it was read into the congressional record. I just wanted to give you a minute to get your pen. Write this down. The U.S. Congressional Record of June 7, 1957, page 7653. Let me give it to you again. This is very important. Somehow we have to reach the other good Americans out there that are struggling like you and I are to raise our families without drugs and to raise our family without being involved in gangs and raise our families and raise our children in a moral environment. We must get this out to them, all of this information we're giving out here tonight. It was the U.S. Congressional Record, June 7, 1957, page 7653. And here's what was said in the book written by communists to destroy this nation we all love. We must realize that our party's most powerful weapon is racial tension. By propounding into the consciousness of the dark races that for centuries they have been oppressed by the whites, we can mold them to the program of the Communist Party. In America, we will aim for subtle victory. While inflaming the Negro minority against the whites, we will endeavor to install in the whites a guilt complex for the exploitation of the Negroes. Now, I'm going to stop there because I don't want to read you the rest of it. It is so sick and it's so hideous what is written in that section, and I want you to look it up yourself so you can prove what I'm telling you is the truth. And you'll understand the sickness, the absolute evil that controls not just America today, but the world. These people hate anybody that's not an elitist. They hate anybody that's not rich. And I'm not talking about the little general in Texas. He's not rich. $4 billion is not rich to these guys. Really. Perot is not rich. He's one of the pawns. We're talking about multi billions of dollars is what these people respect, and the only ones. They don't like the white race. They don't like the black race. They don't like the Hispanic race, the Oriental race, if you're not one of the super rich in this world. And so we're all in this together. And there's two Achilles heel of the enemy that I see here that we can attack and attack and attack and hurt them terribly with. And those two Achilles heels is one of them right here. We can work together because we are all Americans with our black neighbors, our Hispanic neighbors, our Oriental neighbors to gain They know they can't win if we all get together and love one another and work towards a common goal of saving our nation.
Carl is a highly decorated hero of the Vietnam War, serving in the elite Apache troop as a paratrooper and crew chief. The famous movie Apocalypse Now and the best-selling book Apache Sunrise are based on the true life experiences of this group of brave and patriotic Americans. Carl Miller was inducted into the top-secret project Blue Book, and he considers it an honor to have served in several operations supporting Lieutenant Colonel Bo Greitz, including Operation Eagle Snatch. Carl is a veteran of hundreds of dangerous parachute jumps, breaking his legs or ankles 6 times, shot down 4 times, personally shot twice. Carl has miraculously escaped death numerous times. Carl credits divine intervention and God's providence for the preserving his life unto this day so that he may complete the most important mission of his life.
By the way, my name is Carl Miller. I want to thank you again for inviting me into your home. We want to show Jack McLam's magnificent books too, Vampire Killer 2000 and the Aid and Abet newsletter. We need to get these out to every police officer in the United States of America. They need to understand what the heck's going on here. You get a hold of Jack McLam and his people at Vampire Killer 2000 and they will be happy to put this book out. This explains to your police officers exactly what the heck's going on. And they have an Aid and Abet newsletter that you can get. Let's get that out. Aid and Abet. Aid and Abet Police Newsletter, P.O. Box 8787, Phoenix, Arizona, 85066, right? And he has a phone number you can call him too, I think. Now, they have these vampire killers out and it tells the police everything they need to know. Also, they publish a newsletter, Aid and Abet newsletter. You want to make sure. Aid and Abet. Okay?
Tell your Southern Air Transport story.
Yeah, well, we were flying interdiction along the Cambodian border, and we come up on the door of these B-model Huey. It was a smaller Huey, and it was painted blue and silver. And all along the side of the tail boom was white powder. And I informed the aircraft commander, and he told me he was hailing them on the hailing frequency, and he called them up and told them to land. We wanted to inspect their cargo, and they told us basically to blank off and die. You know who we are? My pilot told him he didn't care if he was a man from Glad. He was going to land that aircraft and we were going to inspect his cargo. Basically, he told us, we're not landing. My pilot ordered me to roll my guns up, and he shot him down. And we went down there, and we blew his landing gear off, shot up below his fuel cell, and he got the idea we weren't fooling around. He went down and landed in the rice paddy, and we inspected his cargo, and sure enough, he was carrying heroin. So the pilot gave him a choice. He could go to Long Bin jail with us for contraband trafficking, or he could hitchhike home, baby. So he chose to hitchhike home. Figured he had a chance. Of course, we knew that was going to be rather difficult in Cambodia, him being 3 foot taller than anything they're walking, and a white man on top of that. But we gave him a chance, and the bottom line is he didn't want to go to jail, so we torched his aircraft, and we got back, and the CO, are you crazy? Those people are CIA. They're going to kill you. I told them, make my day. I said, they were trafficking that dope to our GIs and God knows who else. And as far as I'm concerned, we stuck it to them for about $15 million. And I'm just tickled. And if I could do it again tomorrow, I'd do it again.
And so George Bush was like a lot of scions of these world order families. That is, he was unemployable. I mean, if he came in to be interviewed, and there were 8 people there, he would be the 8th one that you would hire if you had to hire 8 people. And, you know, Lyndon Johnson...
He should have had 7 others when he was running for President of the United States.
Well, it's too bad they didn't. Lyndon Johnson was quite a perceptive guy. He was a Texas redneck, and he came to Washington, and he looked at all these bright young men at the Central Intelligence Agency who were from the wealthiest families in the United States. They were there as a lark. They wanted to play James Bond, and their families would do... and as Lyndon said, he said the CIA is composed of scions of wealthy families whose families would never dare let them near the business because it would be dissolved within 6 weeks. So George Herbert Walker Bush, when he finished at Yale, and they said, well, should we put him in the family firm of Brown Brothers Harriman? They said, good God, no, we'll be in the breadlines within 2 months. So they said, let him go work. Let him do what everybody else does. Go work for the Central Intelligence Agency and travel around and have fun. So George went to work for the CIA. It's the only job he ever had, just like Bill Buckley, another scion of a wealthy family. Bill Buckley was hired by the CIA when he finished at Yale, Skull and Bones. We're talking about the Brotherhood of Death here, the Skull and Bones crowd, which Bill Buckley and George Bush and all of the partners at Brown Brothers Harriman were members of this Illuminati fraternity established in 1848 as the Russell Trust by Daniel Court Gilman. But to get back to George, he didn't start out with the CIA. He started out as an agent, a secret agent of the CIA, who was running his own oil company called Zapata Oil Company. And, you know, George, when he wanted a name for his company, he wanted a name that really represented what he believed in. So he didn't call it the Thomas Jefferson Oil Company, and he didn't call it the George Washington Oil Company. He looked down at Mexico, where you had a communist revolutionary named General Emiliano Zapata. And Emiliano was quite a bloodthirsty guy. His idea of a good time was to go into a village and line up all the women and children and shoot them. So George said, this is my kind of guy. So he named his oil company Zapata Oil Company, which showed the kind of people that he would like to have around him.
The mentality of George Bush and Henry Kissinger and David Rockefeller and the rest of the socialists on this Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateralists is not the sovereignty of individual nations as the Bible speaks of them and as God set them up. Their mentality is a new world order, and you'll hear them talking openly about it on the TV today. God ordained nations, and God has ordained not the United Nations. That is satanic. And I'm ashamed that it's on American soil. I'm ashamed that David Rockefeller and his daddy, John D., and those boys bought 16 acres of New York soil and built that complex up there to wickedly bring in a new world order, and that's exactly what they're doing. I'd like to kick them right out in the Atlantic Ocean. We probably got school teachers in here. I recognize the other gentleman that was here last time. Bless your heart. And the new fella, good to have you here tonight. And this fella, how you doing? Good to see you. Travis got his wife. She's still with him after months on the campaign trail. She's got to have great grace from God, just like my wife does, and Brother Strawcutter's wife. We probably got a bunch of folks here that are trying to help educate children, young people. I've got about 10 hours worth of stuff tonight. I'm going to cram it into about 20. You've got a president in there that the New World Order has been grooming since he was a little boy. And George Bush has been groomed by the establishment from the time that he was in college and a member of the Skull and Bones fraternity, and then president of Zapata Oil Company in Texas. You might not like what I'm saying. I'm going to tell you something. I didn't ask your permission to say what I'm saying, and I'm going to stand accountable to God for what I'm saying. And any stinking federal judge or district judge that gets a hold of this tape, may you get an earful, Doc, and may you realize that you're going to bow before the jurisdiction of heaven one day, and it's my job, if I'm a man of God, to tell the truth and tell it like it is and cry loud and spare not. George Bush is putting on a front just like Ronald Reagan was, trying to tell the American people that they've got a war on drugs, and I can document with 40 hours of videotape that George Bush and Richard Armitage with the CIA in 1970 were bringing in 800, 900 tons, 1,000 tons of opium and cocaine into this country every year, flying it in here on American airliners out of Bangkok, Thailand. And he's in bed with Mikhail Gorbachev tonight. I'm not a member of the New World Order, honey. I'm a red-blooded farm boy from Virginia. My granddaddy's bled and died on this soil because they feared the Lord God of this book, and this bunch today running things doesn't even know there is a God, and they deny there's a God. You know why? Because I believe that this government is in cahoots with the Russians. The New World Order. What do I need from Mikhail Gorbachev? What do you need, sir? Sir, ma'am, sir? What do you need, front row, from Mikhail Gorbachev? I'll tell you what I need a goalpost. That's what I need. Hey, man, he's a stinking butcher. Don't tell me how good he is in Perestroika and détente. Now, folks, I've probably scared a lot of you with some of the things I've said, and you might say to yourself here tonight, well, he ought not be allowed to speak like that. Let me tell you, if what I'm saying is a bald-faced lie, I still ought to be able to say it under freedom of speech as long as I'm not hurting you or damaging another man's person, property, or liberty. And if I have made a character assassination on George Bush, then he ought to sue me. Amen? Amen. For defamation of character. And let's just see if he can prove what I've said is not so. Because I happen to know people that got videotapes of General Kun Saw from the Golden Triangle over there at Burma and Laos and Cambodia, where they grow all the opium.
Because they want a controlled conflict. The same thing is happening in South Central Los Angeles. The same thing is happening in major cities throughout the United States and throughout the world. This is conflict control, and the symbols are everywhere.
Let me explain to the audience something very simple in relation to what you're saying. In Africa, and the big game hunters in Africa for many years used to, when you go out to hunt the big game, you wouldn't go into the jungle to look for the big game. You would hire many of the natives to go out with cans and bottles and surround about a 10-mile circle out in front of you and work in, beating cans and bottles and screaming and frightening your prey, the lion or the animal that you're looking for, and he's your prey. And you keep closing in until finally whatever is out there comes out into the open, and he's a sitting duck. That is precisely what has been happening for the last 100 years. The Illuminati have been purposely organizing, directing, and financing wars, revolutions, violence, and bloodshed, so that it will sufficiently impress and frighten the world of humanity into accepting a new order, a new police state that will finally put down all the law and order, the disorder in the world. And it is the oldest trick in the book. Our greatest enemy is not in a crack house, it's in the White House. It's not in a bar room, it's in the boardrooms. And so the point I'm making is that we are being manipulated from the very top. Hollywood. So I'm saying that Hollywood has been used.
But Hollywood is making pictures not for the profit, but for the propaganda.
For the propaganda.
Yes.
But you see, they know what they're saying.
Good morning, General. Oh, I suppose you don't speak English.
All Japanese staff officers speak English, but never mind the social amenity. Be good enough to explain why you're delaying an entire mechanized division of His Imperial Majesty's Army.
Oh, I'm out of gas. You see, I got a truck a couple of miles down the road.
Would you mind showing me your credentials?
Oh, sure.
Do you, by any fortunate chance, happen to have an American cigarette?
Oh, sure. Here. Thanks.
I've spent many years in your country, and I've acquired a taste for them.
Oh, well, here. Take the whole package.
I wouldn't dream of depriving you of pleasure so hard to come by.
Oh, come on, you'll be doing me a favor.
Oh, 1,000 thanks.
We have 2 minutes and a half left.
You must believe me when I say that contrary to popular belief, that the Japanese people have always held your country in great esteem.
Well, that's fine.
Yes, they like it so well that they have finally decided to take it away from you.
You don't say.
In fact, we have already moved toward that aim.
I don't get you.
It will be a pleasure to enlighten you.
Good.
Briefly, it is this. At this very moment, your warships are at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. Your planes were destroyed before they were able to take to the air. Your defenses in the city of Honolulu are a smoking shambles, and your dead by the thousands litter the streets and beaches. And the fate of Pearl Harbor will be the fate of all so-called free democracies who dare oppose the Imperial Japanese government. Because we and our allies, for the ultimate good of all nations concerned, have determined to establish a new world order.
You think so, huh?
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind.
And if there is a conspiracy at work among these men, why hasn't someone on the inside exposed it? The answer is, someone has. Dr. Carroll Quigley is a professor of history at Georgetown University. He is the author of the widely used textbook, Evolution of Civilization. He is a member of the editorial board of the monthly periodical, Current History. He has been a frequent lecturer and consultant for such groups as the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, the Brookings Institution, the U.S. Naval Weapons Laboratory, the Naval College, the Smithsonian Institute, and the State Department. Dr. Quigley also has been closely associated with many of the family dynasties of the super-rich. He is, by his own boast, an insider with a front-row view of the world's money power structure. When Dr. Quigley wrote this 1,300-page book of dry history entitled Tragedy and Hope, it was obvious that it would never be read by the masses. It was intended for the intellectual elite. And to such a select readership, Dr. Quigley cautiously exposed one of the best-kept secrets of all time. But he also made it quite clear that he was an extremely friendly apologist for this group, and that he fully supports their goals and purposes. On page 950, Dr. Quigley says, "I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of its instruments. In general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown." Unless there is any doubt as to who is behind the CFR, Dr. Quigley tells us bluntly, in New York it was known as the Council on Foreign Relations and was a front for J.P. Morgan and Company in association with the very small American Roundtable Group.
And Bill, what's his name? Bill Slick Willie.
Slick Willie.
Yeah. He is in charge of the president. Well, he's the president, but he's in charge of what? Well, actually, I don't think he's in charge of anything. I think he is simply a servant of this oligarchy. He praises an individual called Dr. Carroll Quigley, who says, hey, what we have to have is a global government. And Bill Clinton admits that Dr. Carroll Quigley is his mentor.
He hails from the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, and the Club of Rome, the same establishment groups which gave us George Bush. He studied under and was molded by Georgetown University professor and internationalist Dr. Carroll Quigley, who was an insider in this whole New World Order crowd, who wrote a book called Tragedy and Hope. It should be remembered that Bill Clinton has studied under a highly praised Italian socialists and communists. By the way, this is worth talking about. Not only did he go to the Soviet Union in 1970, but in 1987, when Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas, right, thank you, it's been a long day. When he was governor of Arkansas, by the way, my friends in Arkansas say he wasn't a very good governor. He went over to Italy and he studied economic systems under Italian socialists and communists, and he admitted this to an Italian journalist right after the Democratic Convention last August. And this guy said, what? He said, the would-be president of the United States went over and studied economic plans and how to run an economic system from Italian communists? You've got to be kidding. And he said, yeah, I did. You know, I really learned some great things. And he came back and he set up some little communes in Arkansas after that. And so he went back. He couldn't believe it. But he heard it from Clinton himself. And so he went back, this Italian journalist, and he visited with the communists that Clinton had been over there studying with. And they said, yeah, that's right. And he said, we told him we were communists. So he said, we warned him we were communists. He said, no problem. Okay? That is your president. Now,
they're all proteges and insiders. You had Albert Gore, whose family has lived off of largesse from Arm & Hammer for many years, the founder of the Communist Party of the United States. And this has all been printed in the Washington Post and many other places.
The second I'd like to show you is some of the things that's been going on in our country. This is a picture of Lenin in the park in your fair state of Washington. 18 feet tall, 7-ton bronze statue. From Russia with love, no doubt.
Thank you for those very kind remarks. I'm not sure if any of them were true, but I really appreciate it. It's pretty exciting to come out and see this many people who really care about some of the things that are happening in our country. We're going to talk about where the country is going. Let me just preface my remarks by saying we are plunging towards socialism, in my view, towards a socialist police state. We are plunging towards the New World Order, and we'll talk about that some this evening. So I got in all this back in '59. I was a student at a junior college in South Texas. If you want to pray for somebody and you just run out of people to pray for, I can always use a few extra prayers. I'm coming under a lot of attack for some of the things I'm doing, and it seems to be increasing, as I think is going to happen to an awful lot of us. Okay? Now, we are plunging towards a national police force and an international police force. The socialists believe in crisis management to solve crises, real or manufactured, in order to greatly expand their power and control over the people. Okay? Bill Clinton and Al Gore in their book, Putting Free People First, as I mentioned, called for that 100,000-man police force made up of former retired military personnel, other government employees, etc., to fight the crime war and America's other crises. Clinton's new economic plan calls for the launching of this national police force soon. Outgoing CIA Director Robert Gates has called the CIA to be given the power to spy on American businesses and individuals and help support the Justice Department and other federal agencies in enforcing the myriad of new government laws and regulations. So the CIA wants to spy on us internally. Criminal enforcement agents of the DEA, FBI, CIA, BATF, EPA, FDA, IRS, and various other government agencies and departments are included. If they're all included, the U.S. could soon have a national police force of 200,000 to 300,000 people spying on the public and enforcing regulations, shades of the Gestapo in Nazi Germany or the KGB in Russia.
The police across the United States additionally are being militarized in every nook and cranny. We will point those out to you in a few minutes, some mind-boggling efforts taking place to, in fact, create a United States police force. A bill has been introduced on the floor of the Congress as of this month to create a 2,500-man hit team, I would refer to it as, a specialized group of police directed under Janet Reno herself, and this would literally, when you merge that with what is presently known as the police agency interfacing that's taken place, when you merge the two of them together, you would have an entire standing army for Janet Reno and or the president separately under their command with the alcohol, firearms, tobacco, the FBI, possibly even CIA, which they do interface with them, and that program would constitute an entire standing army for the Attorney General and the President of the United States.
I found out they even have new badges for the police. They're going to have a national police force. You know, Hitler created one in Nazi Germany. Here's another article. It says, good guys wear black. Now the police can wear black, yet they're the good guys. It says here, if they are ninja-like or even a little Nazi-like, it's not the intent, says Patrolman Peters. But he says it does terrorize a criminal. The real question, my friends, is, are you a criminal? Got it. Don't be bite it.
Vitamin C, you know, like in oranges.
I'm Dr. Lorraine Day. For years, I was on the faculty of the University of California, San Francisco. The FDA is raiding doctors' offices for vitamins. Here is one where they invaded Dr. Jonathan Wright's office up in Kent, Washington, because he was giving patients vitamin B injections. They said, well, you're using an unapproved vitamin. Why was it unapproved? Because he got it from Germany because it doesn't have any preservatives in it. And all the vitamin B in this country has preservatives in it. So in fact, they are storming doctors' offices. They came in with guns drawn, flak jackets on, held the receptionist up with her arms extended because she was at gunpoint, terrorized these people. What for? Vitamins.